Now, Derek Chauvin's sentencing hearing has started. The sentencing hearing for former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin has started. Chauvin, 45, was convicted in April on charges of second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter for his role in the 2020 murder of George Floyd. Prosecutors for the state of Minnesota have requested a 30-year prison sentence, saying it would properly account for the profound impact of defendants' conduct on the victim's family, and the community, according to a sentencing memo. Chauvin's defense attorney, Eric Nelson, argued that the former officer should instead receive probation and time served, or at least a sentence less than what the law guides. Here's what happened during Derek Chauvin's trial. Former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was found guilty of the murder of George Floyd on April 20. Chauvin, 45, who knelt on Floyd's neck for more than 9 minutes, was convicted of second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter. Here are the key takeaways from Chauvin's trial. Reaching a verdict, the jurors deliberated for more than 10 hours over 2 days before coming to their decision. The guilty verdict came about 11 months after the murder of Floyd, which occurred on May 25, 2020. Understanding the verdict, the second-degree murder charge said Chauvin assaulted Floyd with his knee, which unintentionally caused Floyd's death. The third-degree murder charge said Chauvin acted with a depraved mind, and the manslaughter charge said his culpable negligence caused Floyd's death. Reading the verdict, although he wore a mask, Chauvin had no apparent reaction to the guilty verdict. Immediately, his bail was revoked, and he was placed in handcuffs. Officials said Chauvin was taken to a facility in Stillwater, Minnesota, where was placed in an administrative control unit, a housing unit that is separated from the general population for safety concerns. What comes next? Chauvin's sentence today will depend on several factors, including the state's sentencing guidelines and whether the judge decides to go beyond the guidelines because of certain circumstances. Chauvin could face up to 40 years in prison for second-degree murder, up to 25 years for third-degree murder and up to 10 years for manslaughter. Prosecutors have requested a 30-year sentence for Chauvin. From CNN's Omar Jimenez and Brad Parks. Prosecutors for the state of Minnesota are requesting a 30-year prison sentence for Derek Chauvin, the former officer convicted of the murder of George Floyd, according to a sentencing memo. 30 years is twice the upper end of the presumptive sentencing range, according to the memo filed with the District Court of Hennepin County on June 2. It would properly account for the profound impact of defendants' conduct on the victim's family, and the community, the state argued. Chauvin's attorney, Eric Nelson, had argued in a filing that day that Chauvin should instead receive probation and time served, or at least a sentence less than what the law guides. Mr. Chauvin asks the court to look beyond its findings, to his background, his lack of criminal history, his amenability to probation, to the unusual facts of this case, and to his being a product of a broken system, Nelson wrote. Mr. Chauvin's offense is best described as an error made in good faith reliance his own experience as a police officer and the training he had received, not intentional commission of an illegal act. Nelson also wrote, a stringent probationary sentence with incarceration limited to time served would achieve the purposes of the sentence in this case. Floyd died May 25, 2020, after Chauvin placed his knee on his neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds as Floyd pleaded, "I can't breathe." Keep reading here. What we know about the other officers charged in Floyd's death. From CNN's Amir Vera and Jason Hanna. The 3 other officers facing charges in George Floyd's death are expected to be tried together in 2022. J. Alexander Quinn, 27, Thomas Lane, 38, and Thao, 35, had been set to stand trial in August on Minnesota state charges of aiding and abetting second-degree murder and aiding and abetting second-degree manslaughter connected to Floyd's death last May. They have pleaded not guilty. In April, former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin, 45, was convicted of second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter. Floyd family members will speak at today's sentencing. Some of George Floyd's family members will be speaking at today's sentencing hearing for Derek Chauvin, and Floyd's daughter Jaya may give some kind of statement, Floyd family attorney Benjamin Crump said on CNN. Family members of George Floyd will be speaking, delivering their victim impact statements and how his tragic death has impacted them and impacted their family and most profoundly, impacted the community, Crump said. When asked directly if Jaya would speak, Crump said the family wants to make sure she's protected because she's still only a child. But there is a chance that there will be some statement from her perspective and his other family members, his brothers and sisters and people who know him best, Crump added of Jaya. Crump said that while activists around the world have rallied around the Floyd family in the year since his murder, his family is dealing with the loss of a loved one. To us it is a hashtag, a case, a cause, to them that is their flesh and blood, he said. Judge denies Derek Chauvin's request for new trial. Judge Peter Cahill speaks during Derek Chauvin's trial on April 19. Judge Peter Cahill speaks during Derek Chauvin's trial on April 19. Poole. Hennepin County District Court Judge Peter Cahill has denied former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin's post-verdict motion for a new trial. In a ruling filed Thursday evening, Cahill said the defendant has failed to demonstrate that the court abused its discretion or committed error such that defendant was deprived of his constitutional right to a fair trial. Cahill also said the defendant failed to demonstrate the state engaged in prosecutorial misconduct or a case for juror misconduct. Chauvin is set to be sentenced later this afternoon for the murder of George Floyd. The sentencing hearing is scheduled to begin at 2:30 p.m. ET. In April, Chauvin was convicted of second-degree unintentional murder, second-degree manslaughter and third-degree murder in the 2020 death of George Floyd. The defense argued in court filings that errors, abuses of discretion, prosecutorial and jury misconduct during the trial made it unfair. In asking Cahill to deny the motion for new trial, prosecutors said the court already rejected many of the arguments. The request for new trial is different than an appeal in that it is addressed to the trial judge. Chauvin will have 90 days from the imposition of his sentence to file an appeal with the Minnesota Court of Appeals. Derek Chauvin will be sentenced today for the murder of George Floyd. From CNN's Amir Vera and Jason Hanna. Derek Chauvin listens in court during his trial on April 20th. Derek Chauvin listens in court during his trial on April 20th. Poole. Former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin, who was found guilty of the murder of George Floyd, will be sentenced today at 2:30 p.m. ET. Chauvin's sentence will depend on several factors, including the state's sentencing guidelines, and whether the judge decides to go beyond the guidelines because of certain circumstances. Technically, Chauvin could face up to 40 years in prison for second-degree murder, up to 25 years for third-degree murder and up to 10 years for manslaughter. However, Chauvin has no prior criminal record. The state's guidelines say that for such a person, the presumptive sentence for both second-degree and third-degree murder is 12.5 years. The judge is given discretion to hand down a sentence between 10 years and 8 months and 15 years for each. Second-degree manslaughter carries a presumptive sentence of 4 years for someone with no record, according to the guidelines. The judge's discretion ranges from 3 years and 5 months to 4 years and 8 months. However, prosecutors are asking for a tougher sentence than the recommendations provide. In 2 filings last year, prosecutors said 5 aggravating factors warrant an increased sentence. Those factors include that Floyd was particularly vulnerable, that he was treated with particular cruelty, and that children were present when the crimes were committed. If the judge applies aggravating factors, it would shift Chauvin's sentence to a higher part of the legal range. The sentences for all 3 crimes would likely be served at the same time, not consecutively. Generally, when an offender is convicted of multiple current offenses, concurrent sentencing is presumptive, according to the guidelines.